female representation in anime and with media at large is problematic. Often female characters can be boiled down to, as comic book artist Kelly Sue Dukins puts it, into a sexy lamp, often being a hollow shell to attract the male gaze to the media with no real substance, or in some cases where their characters has been thoroughly designed and the story treats them correctly, they can be depicted horribly with unrealistic proportions, flashes of their panties, and devaluating the character to that of pure fan service. Yet, some of the best female representation that I can remember come from anime. Characters that are both fully developed and not overly sexualized. This essay isn't going to try to convince people one way or another, but instead create a point of discussion. And I won't be able to cover everything in this video, mainly because I don't have infinite time. In order to effectively view female representation in anime, we're going to have to establish what is good female representation in media in general. There's really no universal law for this, as Kathy A. Freeland states in her wonderful essay, Feminist Frameworks of Horror Films, that feminists from around the world differ. Feminists from France, United States, England, and Japan will all view a work differently. One might view a piece of work as degrading, another might view it as empowering. There are tests that you can conduct on media to judge if it has good female representation, but you still have to think critically. It's also important to note there are two types of female representation when it comes to anime character: design and character depiction. Character design covers how the character is written and the text of the media that surrounds them. The character depiction covers how the character is drawn and how the camera frames them. An anime can have good female representation in one area and poor representation in another one. One Piece, for example, has great character design. Each character has a rich background and is important to the story. But One Piece has an issue with its character depiction due to the same body type Oda uses, skinny girls with big boobs. And I love One Piece. Most of these shows I'm going to talk about I do enjoy. It's important when watching media to acknowledge it does have flaws. You can like an imperfect piece of media. It's okay to. For character design, there are a few tests that can be used to help determine if a piece of media has good female representation. It's kind of important to look at the context of the media when applying these tests. Some animes and movies will fail this test, but because of the context of the show, it's okay. It's sort of like Haiku, where it focuses on a male volleyball team. I would not expect it to have a high amount of female characters. Or in the reverse with K-On!, where it focuses on a school band in an all-girl school, I would not expect it to have a high level of male characters. In 1985, American comic book artist Alison Bechdel released this strip for her comics, Dykes to Watch Out For. This has become known as the Bechdel test. It's probably one of the most famous and most recognizables of these tests. In order for a piece of media to pass this test, it has to meet just 3 criteria. 1. The movie has to have at least 2 women in it. 2. Who talk to each other. And 3. About something other than men. The reverse of this is called the Smurfette principle, where you only really have one female character dominated by a group of male characters. Saberspark released a great video about it, which I've included down in the description. Now, the Bechdel test isn't perfect. What it mainly comes down to is the quantity of female characters, and also trying to have the female characters interact in a more realistic way. It kind of more or less comes down to the quantity and not necessarily the quality of the female characters. You can have a strong female characters and the show will fail the test. It's also a fairly low bar, which surprisingly a lot of Western media fails at. Think of the Bechdel test kind of as like a first grade test. In first grade, yes, it should be hard, but you've been out of school for almost 1,000 years. A fair amount of animes that I've viewed has passed this test on the serialized level. This test was designed for movies, so when we're applying it for TV shows, we kind of have to look at it per episode basis and then kind of find the percentage of how many episodes pass this test to determine if a series passes the test. Shows like Jujutsu Kaisen passes it, Steins Gate pass it, Cowboy Bebop pass it, High School DxD pass it, to name a few. This year's Escape the Affinity fails the Bechdel test, which is kind of very sad to me. It's a sport that has a poor female representation in real life, could have really benefited immensely from having two of the skaters being female role models and inspiration for a female viewer to try the sport out. And that kind of really gets to the heart of why representation is important. We often use media as a way to kind of sort of justify our own existence, to give us reasons and confidence to be able to do stuff that we might have interest in, but we're too nervous or too scared to. Being able to see ourselves on the screen helps with that. But again, like I said, the Bechdel test is almost primarily focused on the quantity and not necessarily the quality. It's possible for a piece of media to pass the test, but at the same time have horribly written female characters. If you have two female characters in your show, and the only lines they have to each other was, "Did you fart? Yes, I did fart," it will pass the test. That's where the sexy lamp test comes in, a separate test created by Kelisu Dukanik. The basics of the test is that if you can replace the female character with a sexy lamp with a post-it note on them, then you fail the test. But the female character serves no meaningful impact on the story whatsoever besides being motivation or an object of desire within the story. Asuna in the fairy dance arc can be replaced by a sexy lamp and nothing changes. Oberon stole Kiriko's favorite sexy lamp, and now he has to play this VR game to get it back. Does the overarching part of the story changes? No. Another thing Asuna suffers from in the fairy dance arc is a concept called freezing, where a female character is devalued in order to become motivation for the male character. This comes from a Green Lantern comics, I believe in the 90s, where Green Lantern's wife was killed and put in a fridge as a motivation for his character. And finally, there is a third test that has risen called the Mori test, which is the following: one, have at least one female character who gets her own narrative arc that is not about supporting a man's story. Now, does failing any of these tests make a show have bad female representation? Not necessarily. A show can pass the Mori test but fail the Bechdel test. Does that mean one test is better than the other? No. They're looking at two different things. The Mori test is looking at the quality of the arc, where the Bechdel test is looking for the quantity and less of a male fantasy. What these tests are fundamentally for is how a work treats its female characters. Are they merely an object to oodle over, or do they have an impact on the story and feel like a complete being? What is true good representation is subjective. One person might view a piece of media as having good representation, another might not, and say it's not enough. It's really kind of up to you to determine if a show you want has good representation or not. But how do we handle the depiction of female characters? There are not as many tests that I'm aware of that can be used for this purpose. There is the Nighthawk test, which is if you can replace the drawing of female character with Nighthawk and it does not look ridiculous, it passes the test. But there are a few questions we can ask as we watch the medium. Does the camera objectify the woman without her consent? Or how are the female characters drawn in the show? Do they lack diversity? What will often be pointed out as poor female representation is a well-endowed female character. Just look at Twitter's reaction to Yuzaki-chan. And although this can be true, the majority of times it's not. It becomes an issue when it fails the first two questions. Does the camera objectify them without their consent? Or are the female characters all depicted this way? For with One Piece, where the characters who are important to the story are drawn with big boobs and small waist, or they're overweight. The issue with this is it creates an idea of the desired body, the perfect body an individual should have. Persons should not feel ashamed of how they look, and we often view media as a way to justify our own existence. Miss Kobayashi Dragon Maid has a plethora of different female body types, but is Quetzalcoatl's proportion too much? And honestly, no. A real individual can see themselves and not feel ashamed. I do have an issue with the sound effects used while the character breasts are moving. I find it brings an odd attention to them with a relatively wholesome anime, adding a bit of fan service to it. It's very rare to see a female anime character whose personality does not feel like a carbon copy of a different female character. This personality trope are referred to as the dere, often taking real-world traits and bringing them to an extreme levels. The most common ones are the modern tsundere, which is a female character who switches between two emotional states rapidly, often for one single person. Most likely, she is cruel and harsh to her love interest, only to internally go into a tizzy or become flustered when she is with them. It's almost like a kindergarten crush, where the only way they can show affection is by hitting their love interest, because they don't know how to express this. A classical tsundere is a character with a harsh personality, only for it to be revealed that the harsh personality is a protection mechanism, and in truth, they are quite vulnerable. Of the modern iteration of tsundere, there are two main categories you can subdivide a character into. Most common is the son, a character with a harsh personality on the outside, but a sweet personality on the inside. Examples include Noelle from Black Clover, Rukia from Bleach, Erina in Food Wars, and Taiga from Toradora. Which Taiga is more or less a deconstruction of this trope. And on the opposite, you have dere, a sweet character on the outside, but a harsh character on the inside. Examples include Levi McGarden from Fairy Tail, Winry Rockbell, and Fullmetal Alchemist. The yandere is a little bit less common nowadays, but what it loosely translates to is lovesick. It's a character who appears to be sweet and innocent, but really is sadistic and menacing, capable of extreme acts of violence. Their love interest merely becomes an object of desire for them, willing to do whatever it takes to be with them. It is the opposite of the tsundere, warm and sweet on the outside, but on the inside sadistic and menacing, willing to do whatever it takes to be with their interest. Examples include Sato from Happy Sugar Life, Yukioko from JoJo Part 4. There's also Dendere, the silent type, one that surrounds themselves with a shell only to break out of the shell in small groups or with their loved ones. It's the anime version of an introvert. Famous examples is Hinata from Naruto. There's a plethora of other dere tropes, but I'm going to leave that for you to discover on your own. Female character having one of these dere tropes is not necessarily a negative. Faye Valentine demonstrates a bit of the tsundere trope, a template that she was built off of. History and personality are added on top of that template. to the point where it's hard to recognize until someone points it out to you. The issue is not female characters displaying these traits at all. The issue comes from when female character only display a single dere, without much adaptation, almost feeling like they were created in a factory, where the male counterpart would be multidimensional and have their own personalities, not really trapped in the dere stereotype. Although male characters can often suffer from these self-insert, which female characters can suffer from too. It almost seems like the best rating female characters, or the ones that are often remembered, are the badasses, often being able to pass both the sexy lamp test, the Mori test, and devoid of the damsel in distress and the dere tropes that often plague anime. Not a male character to be sidelined by their male counterparts, or to exist as an object to be obtained, or to be thrown into a refrigerator to motivate the male character. They exist multidimensionally. Revi from Black Lagoon, Faye Valentine, Mikasa from Attack on Titan are all perfect examples of this. Revi is cold, sadistic, and what almost appears to be insanity and almost pleasure from killing, you come to realize is a defense mechanism of her devoting much of her humanity to be able to survive with her tragic past in the cruel and twisted world she calls home. She's the classical Cinderella, but it's only an outline for her. Her and Brooks, the male protagonist relationship, is very much symbiosis, where she represents the darkness of the human existence, he represents that of hope. A Japanese businessman thrust into the world of piracy. Much of these two characters' arc focuses on the transmorphic of their personality, Revi slowly gaining a bit of her humanity back, and Brooke learning to let go. Revi, you could easily replace her with a male character and not much will change. Devoid of femininity in its entirety, the same is true for Mikasa, minus the one-sided love they have. And on a singular character level, this is not necessarily an issue, but when the majority of well-written female characters share this trait, it becomes problematic. Ripley from Alien, an iconic feminist role model, was originally written as a male character, only changed in the last moment with the script immediately switches the pronouns of her character to reflect this. It has been kind of an advice to male writers to write their female characters as male characters, because writers ultimately write what they know and understand. Poorly written female characters are a symptom of a heavily male-dominated industry. You can see this often reflected when an anime source material is written by a woman compared to that of a male writer. 86 written by Osto has some amazingly written female character. Lena's strength is that of compassion. She cares for and is deeply hurt when members of her division are killed, even if the rest of the society view them as non-humans, going so far as to call the mechs they drive unmanned vehicles. Her femininity is not hidden, but instead her greatest strength. Male writers can also write amazing female character. Faye Valentine, who is based off of the femme fatale of film noir, will often use the male gaze to her advantage to try to get out of sticky situation. And Nakana from Psychopaths, who has to deal with the reality of the world not aligning up with how she thought the world would work. Jujutsu Kaisen also has amazingly written female characters too. And here's some recommendations for animes that I feel have good female representation. There is the wonderful violent Evergaden, whose call to adventure comes from her commanding officer telling her that he loves her as he comes to her fatal blow. Now, on first look or examination, one would be led to believe that her character onto itself is dependent onto the male supervisor, then a fundamental existence within the story is to find him. But the reality of it is Violent Evergarden is not an examination of love between two characters, but more or less the concept of love in general. Violet has grown up in war and she's never really experienced peace all that much. So when her commanding officer says that he loves her, she doesn't even understand what the word love means. So she joins the Auto Mail, a group of basically secretaries that will write what the citizens of the country tell them to write and send it off to people. By doing this, she slowly kind of understands and learns what love is. It's almost taking the badass woman concept from before and asking what happens after the war is over. Otoko Love is Hard for an Otaku, which focuses on two adult otaku couples navigating their relationship while being otaku. The show does a great job of bringing to life into each of its character. I have a full video that really kind of dives a bit more into it. I encourage you to check it out. Mei from Bunny Girl Senpai is also a very well-written character who is really not dependent on the male character. For vast majority of the show, she will go off and do her acting gig on her own. There is the shoujo anime genre, which is an anime genre devoted towards girls, often written by women. This is the female counter to the shonen genre. Examples include Nana, which focuses on two girls named Nana meeting up with each other and moving in and them slowly navigating through life. There's the slight warning with Nana that it has been on hiatus since I think 2018 and it might never continue, so take that with a grain of salt. There's also the legendary Sailor Moon, Fruit Basket, My Next Life as a Villainess, or Roots Leads to Doom, Maid-sama, Revolutionary Girl Ultra. Each of these shows handle their female leads with the most part respect. Maid-sama does use the damsel in distress trope a bit too often for my liking. Miss Koreos' Dragon Maid is one of the more wholesome animes out there. It's about a dragon and a human learning to live together along with other mythical creatures. Now, there is kind of a bit of a caveat to this recommendation. It does have a decent amount of fan service to it, which kind of can be off-putting. The dynamic and the relationship between the two lead female characters is incredibly well done, and honestly, it focuses on a lesbian relationship that you don't really see all that often. And it also heavily deals with the concept of a found family. There's also the slice of life genre, which you do have to be careful with. Some of them will have well-written female characters, while others will have female characters written towards a more of a male fantasy. Positive examples include K-On!, which is about an all-girl rock band, Flying Witch, a young girl learning to be a witch, and the intricacies that go with it. Yuri Camp is about navigating new friendships and the world of camping. Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, Jujutsu Kaisen, Cowboy Bebop, Black Lagoon, to name a few shows that have a bit of badass female characters to it that are also very well written. There's also the legendary Hiro Miyazaki, who is kind of a master at creating female characters for his work. Anyways, I'm the Forgotten Critic, and once again, I have been forgotten. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, like, comment, and subscribe.